Designated student athletes are now eligible to enter the transfer portal until August 5th. Here's what that could mean for the Gonzaga Bulldogs.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Well, Chet Holmgren signed the richest contract for a Zag of all time. Kelly Olynyk was traded for the third time in the year 2025. Gonzaga added a bye game to the non-conference slate. We're going to break all of that down. But first, there is a new transfer portal window open in college basketball, in college athletics. It opened July 7th, and it will be open until August 5th. A 30-day window open for designated student athletes. So what's a designated student athlete? What does this mean for Gonzaga? What does this mean for college basketball? Will we see any high-profile players, any players of significance, frankly, entering the transfer portal, changing teams here in early July, well after most rosters are already completely set in stone? We're going to talk about that here. A designated student athlete. This stems from the House settlement, which we've talked about quite a bit, which was confirmed and went into effect on July 1st, changing a handful of rules across the college basketball and college sports space, most notably, of course, the ability for schools to directly pay student athletes for their name, image, and likeness, and having a cap on how much money you're allowed to spend. And we've talked about what this means for Gonzaga potentially as being a program that is in a conference where every other team in the conference is going to be spending their money on football, and Gonzaga does not have football, and the advantage that potentially creates for them. But one of the other things that came out of the House settlement is a restriction on the amount of players you're allowed to have on your roster. And you may be thinking, well, in basketball, it's always been 13. There's always been a restriction. There's been a scholarship limit, but it's no longer a scholarship limit. Every player on your roster is on scholarship. Walk-ons are effectively no longer a thing. But instead of having a 13-player scholarship limit, you have a 15-player overall limit. So in many years, including last year, Gonzaga has had more than 15 players on their roster. They've had 3 or more walk-ons on the team, along with 13 scholarship players. That creates more than 15 players, and that's been allowed and acceptable for all of college basketball history up to this point. So now, part of the reason the House settlement was delayed is that with this rule change coming into effect, they did not want a sudden influx of players to just be cut from their programs, kicked out of school and sent on their way packing because these teams had to condense down their rosters. This makes a much bigger impact in sports with bigger rosters like football, most notably. It's not as significant in basketball because most teams have maybe 1 or 2 guys. Some teams don't even have any extra players. But the designated student athlete is an athlete who is exempt from roster limits, meaning if a school designates a player or terms a player a designated student athlete, that player is grandfathered in for this upcoming season. So if Gonzaga termed a handful of players designated student athletes, those players would be allowed to be on the roster next season, even if that puts Gonzaga over the 15-player limit. Does that make sense? Good. Schools can add an athlete to a DSA if they follow these following 3 things. 1, they would have been removed from the roster due to roster limits. So if Gonzaga determined that so-and-so player wouldn't have been on the team if they had to be at 15, that counts. The player also had to be an eligible member of the team last year, and they had to be recruited and assured of a spot for the upcoming year. So if a player was on the roster last year, was planning to be on the roster again this year, the limit went into effect saying you can only have 15 players, and this player would have been on the chopping block. They are now a designated student athlete. And again, the school has to actually give them that terminology, has to make it clear, not publicly, so we may never see the list, but they have to make it clear to the NCAA, here are our designated student athletes. And as such, because this rule will go into effect next year, they determined that adding a transfer portal window makes sense for these players who may think, oh, my school told me I'm a designated student athlete. That may mean I don't have a roster spot on this team next year. I'm going to look to transfer and find myself somewhere else to play for this upcoming season. So that's the mechanism behind this concept. That's the reason that there's a transfer portal window opening up in July into August. That's the reason that you may have seen a few headlines. Noah Shelby is the most notable player who entered the transfer portal. He was on Kansas's roster last year. He was a redshirt last year at Kansas. Previously, he had played at Rice, where he averaged 4 points per game, 33% from three in about 12 minutes. Are those elite numbers? No. Does that make him even the best player currently available in the transfer portal? Probably not, but he's a relatively notable player, a player who there are programs out there, mid-major programs, who would absolutely add him to their roster, and now he becomes available early July, not something you see every day. Now, will this impact Gonzaga? That's the question. Looking at Gonzaga's roster right now and making the assumption that Tyon Grant-Foster will have his waiver approved and will be able to play for Gonzaga next year, which is the assumption that we are making. That would put Gonzaga at 16 players on the roster. We do not know if Gonzaga has or will, but July 6th was the date Gonzaga needed to label any player a DSA. So we may not ever know if they did, if there are players on this program who have that label attached to them or not. But as of right now, we have not seen any of those players enter the transfer portal. So for Gonzaga, they have 11 players that are kind of competing for the rotation spots on this team. 11 players that I would traditionally consider scholarship players, again, with the caveat that everybody's a scholarship player in the post-House era. That would be E.K. Huff, Tyon Grant-Foster, Adam Miller, Braden Smith, Jalen Warley, Emmanuel Innocente, Ismaila Diani, Steele Venters, Davis Fogel, and Parker Jefferson. Those are your 11, for lack of a better word, scholarship players. And then you have the 4 walk-ons, 3 of them who were legitimately walk-ons last season: Joaquin Reyes-Moore, Noah Holland, who is a junior college transfer, and then Cade Orness, who redshirted last year. He's a incoming freshman who was a walk-on last year from North Kitsap High School. So those are your 3 walk-ons who were on the team last year. And then the Zags have also added again, walk-on type player in Alonzo Metz from Miami, who previously played at Jesuit High School in Portland. So if those 4 players are all on the roster, if the 11 scholarship players are all on the roster, again, assuming Grant-Foster gets his waiver approved, that's 16. Again, Gonzaga can carry 16 this year, but they will have had to label at least one of those players as a designated student athlete. My guess, for what it is worth, is that there are 3 of them that they label designated student athletes. It would be the 3 walk-ons who were on the team last year: Orness, Holland, and Joaquin Reyes-Moore. It's just a guess based on the criteria and the fact that, we know Gonzaga had to label at least somebody that. They couldn't put it on Alonzo Metz because he was not on the roster last year, which is part of the stipulations in order to be labeled a designated student athlete. So the question is effectively this: will any of those 3 players, Reyes-Moore, Noah Holland, Cade Orness, enter the transfer portal? My guess is no. My guess is probably not. If any of them wanted to enter the transfer portal, they would have done so in the initial 30-day window, which was, of course, shortly after the season, or shortly after the Sweet 16 in the NCAA tournament. We did, in fact, see a Gonzaga walk-on who did not play last year enter the transfer portal at that time. That was Graydon Lemke. Graydon Lemke's still in the transfer portal, although I believe he is very close to making a commitment. The previous year, Gonzaga did have a walk-on enter the transfer portal as well. That was Colby Brooks. Colby Brooks ended up landing at San Diego, played for the Toreros last year, actually started against Gonzaga in that game in Spokane, and has now re-entered the transfer portal and is still unsigned as of this recording. So ultimately, the odds of this transfer portal window impacting Gonzaga this year are pretty slim. And if it were to be an impact, it would be Gonzaga losing a player that is not incredibly consequential to the play on the court. Obviously, walk-ons do have an impact on the team from a camaraderie perspective and various other things. So I don't want to pretend it wouldn't matter in any capacity, but I have a very, very, I think it's a very slim chance that any of these players enter the portal. I think honestly, they probably would have already, as it's already been open for a couple of days. And again, they all had 30 days to make this decision back in April, and they chose not to leave. So I don't see why they would leave now. But it's a new wrinkle, part of the new experience of the post-house settlement era, and something we'll keep an eye on for the next month or so. And then, of course, next year, kind of seeing what Gonzaga does without having the ability to grandfather players in onto this spot for next year. Well, folks, in the animal kingdom, I would absolutely take a camel over a bulldog. But in college hoops, give me the Zags. More on Gonzaga adding Campbell to the non-conference slate coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, the summer sports are in full swing. So whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf out on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action, so why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned out on the beach. You can use FanDuel to track your favorite matchups, and the app keeps it fresh with new daily promotions and fun ways to bet. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. So whether you're placing a same-game parlay or watching a bet right out into the ninth inning, FanDuel makes it feel like you're part of the action. And if you want to get in on those future odds for the Gonzaga Bulldogs, they're at plus 3,500 to take home their first national championship in the 2026 season. So, folks, if you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if that first bet wins. So open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. Moving away from our conversation about one of the new rules coming out of the House settlement, the addition of designated student athletes and the fact that they now have a 30-day transfer portal window and what that might mean for the Zags, to instead talk about one of the few pieces of news we got over the last couple of days. Gonzaga has added the Campbell Camels to their non-conference schedule for this upcoming season. We've talked about the non-con slate a handful of times and have kind of speculated that we're at the point now where the majority, if not the entirety, of the rest of the games that will be added to Gonzaga's schedule before things tip off in November will be of the bye game variety. There'll be games or opponents that are coming to Spokane, coming to the kennel, and Gonzaga's paying them money to fly out to Spokane and lose a basketball game. That's what a bye game is. That's what it's always been. And Gonzaga typically has 3 to 4 of these per year, and they only have about 3 to 4 games left on their schedule at this point. And with so many prominent opponents already on the non-con, it wouldn't be a surprise to see the rest of this schedule filled out with teams like Campbell. Not only do we know that the Zags are going to play Campbell next year, we know the date. It'll be Wednesday, December 17th. It'll be at the kennel. This was reported by the great Rocco Miller of Bracketeer.org. Rocco also does some scheduling work in college basketball. It's also been confirmed by Campbell themselves. They posted on their social media that they are coming out to Spokane. They posted the date, so we know that December 17th, Gonzaga versus Campbell at the kennel is all happening. First known bye game for Gonzaga this year. Again, will not be the last one. Campbell went 15-17 last year overall. They were 10-8 in the Coastal Athletic American or Coastal Conference last year. They finished 5th in the CAA. They were 220th at KenPom, so not bad, not great by any stretch, but a lot of times you see those bye games be teams that are in like the 330s, 340s, 350s even at KenPom. So to see a team, this team was 4 spots behind Pepperdine, and we're not going to pretend that makes them good necessarily, because we wouldn't describe Pepperdine as being particularly good. But again, it's different than like an Alcorn State or a Mississippi Valley State or some of those other teams that tend to be among the very worst teams in all of college basketball. Also, in the modern era, using a previous season's KenPom numbers to predict how the team will do the next year is less predictable than ever before, especially when said team went through a coaching change and added 7 players in the transfer portal. This is a completely new look Camels roster, now being coached by John Ondrejczyk. Ondrejczyk takes over. It is his first year as a collegiate head coach, so it's always fun to compete against a first-year head coach. He has had a very successful career as an assistant coach, working with some very familiar faces. He was actually an assistant at Wazoo from 2019 to 2023, all under Coach Kyle Smith. Kyle Smith, considered one of the smarter coaches in college basketball, is now, of course, at Stanford in the ACC. When Kyle Smith decided to go to Stanford, Ondrejczyk instead went to Florida to go work for Todd Golden and the Gators. He spent the last 2 years coaching as an assistant coach at Florida with Coach Golden. Of course, that means that he won a national championship last year for the Gators, so he is somebody who has national championship experience, who has Pac-12 experience, coaching who has Eastern Washington experience, or at least Inland Northwest experience from his time in Pullman. So he's very familiar with Spokane. He's very familiar with Gonzaga, more so than most coaches at a program like this would be. So very cool to get a chance to compete against him in his first year as a head coach. And again, program's bringing in 7 new players in the transfer portal, so it's going to be a completely new look team for the Camels, but a good opportunity for Gonzaga to get that bye game. And we kind of expected that midweek in that week was going to be when Gonzaga would have a game, because we knew that they're playing Kentucky the 5th, they're playing UCLA the 13th, and they're not going to go 12 days between games, and they're not going to play right up until Christmas. So typically you see a game kind of around like the 17th, 20th, somewhere in there, with a few days before Christmas where the team gets off. So the 17th makes a ton of sense for Gonzaga, and that is when they're going to take on Campbell. There's also been a report, and it is not confirmed, so I'm not going to give it a ton of airtime, but there is a report that Gonzaga is also going to host Southern Utah. And then the date for that game would be November 17th. Again, until that's confirmed, we're going to call that speculation at this point, but it does look like Gonzaga is at least actively working on trying to put together the final pieces of their non-conference schedule. And as we suspected, it looks like they're mostly going to be of the bye game variety. Here's what we got so far for Gonzaga. The first known game on the calendar from a date perspective is November 8th. Gonzaga taking on Porter Moser and the Oklahoma Sooners in the SEC. That game will be at the Spokane Arena, first of a home-and-home series. We'll see if that return game is on Oklahoma's campus or somewhere else in the area. The next game is 3 days later. Gonzaga taking on Creighton, Greg McDermott and the Blue Jays. That game November 11th. It's also the first of a home-and-home series, so we're expecting that game will be at the Kennel. They have not officially announced that, but I'd be very surprised if Gonzaga played back-to-back games at the Spokane Arena. So I'm pretty sure that game is going to be at the McCarthy Athletic Center. After that, if the Southern Utah rumors are real, then that would be 6 days later, November 17th. We're expecting that game, of course, to be at the Kennel. After that is when Gonzaga gets into the Players Era NIL Festival, which is going on November 24th, 25th, 26th. That's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of Feast Week in Las Vegas. We know Gonzaga's first 2 opponents in that event will be the Crimson Tide of Alabama. That game November 24th at 6:30. 24 hours later, Gonzaga will take on Maryland out of the Big Ten, the Terps. Same time again, 6:30 on Tuesday the 25th. The third game will be determined after that Maryland game is over, once they're able to figure out everybody's record and figure out their points for, points against, point differential, and kind of parse everything out to determine who Gonzaga plays in that third and final game. After that, the next known game on Gonzaga's schedule is December 5th. Taking on the Wildcats of Kentucky in Nashville at the Bridgestone Arena. That's the 4th game in a 6-year series between Gonzaga and Kentucky. Of course, started back when John Calipari was the head coach of the Cats. Next game is December 13th. 8 days later, a Saturday, against UCLA at the Climate Pledge Arena, game 2 in a 2-year series. Gonzaga lost to UCLA last year at the Intuit Dome. And then 4 days after that is when Gonzaga takes on Campbell at the Kennel. And then there's 2 other known games, although we do not have dates or locations necessarily. For Baylor, at least, we don't have either. It's game 2 in a 3-year series. Gonzaga won the first game last year in Spokane. This game will not be in Spokane, but we don't know whether it'll be a neutral site game or it'll be a true road game for Gonzaga taking on Baylor in Waco. And then the final game, Gonzaga will play Arizona State on the road. So we do know the location. It will be in Tempe. It will be at Arizona State's home court. We just don't know the win for that game. Gonzaga, of course, hosted Arizona State last year, the second game of the regular season. Gonzaga won that one. So looking to go 2-0 in a home-and-home sweep against Bobby Hurley and the Sun Devils. So that's what we know so far. We know the Campbell game is legitimate. We're not 100% sure on the Southern Utah game, but again, that if the Southern Utah game is real, that means Gonzaga's only got 2 non-conference games remaining. I think they're probably both going to be of the bye game variety. So something like Idaho or Long Beach State or North Florida or Montana, if you want to get local. I don't think it'll be Eastern because I don't think Mark Few and Dan Munson are going to play each other willingly at this point. But a local team like Idaho, Idaho State, Montana makes sense. A Big West school like Long Beach, like we saw last year, or somebody of that ilk makes some sense as well. It'd be great if it was Washington. I think we're kind of past the point of expecting it to be Washington at this point. Danny Sprinkle canceled the game last year. I think he's canceling it again this year, at least not re-upping it for this year. So I would expect Again, especially if the Southern Utah game is real, Southern Utah, Campbell, 2 more games, expect them to look kind of like that as we get the final touches on Gonzaga's non-conference schedule getting put together here in July. Well, folks, we're going to break down Chet Holmgren's $250 million deal with the Oklahoma City Thunder and Kelly Olynyk's new home again in a little update on a pair of Zags in the NBA coming up here in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, closing out the show with a pair of updates around some Zags playing in the NBA. We're going to have some Summer League updates for you here very soon. Summer League, the Las Vegas Summer League, the 2K26 Summer League starts on Thursday, as many of you are listening to this today here. So that's when we'll start to see like Ryan Nembhard and Nolan Hickman and Caleb Battle and Ben Gregg and those guys starting to get into action. So far, the only teams that have played are there's a few Zags who've played. Jeremy Jones has played, Hunter Salas has played, Afton Reed has played, but the guys who just left this Gonzaga program will start playing Summer League Thursday, Friday for most of them. So we'll get some updates on that later in the week or starting next week. But for right now, 2 big updates for some guys who are much more established in their professional playing careers. We'll start with Chet Holmgren, signed a 5-year max rookie extension with the Oklahoma City Thunder on Wednesday. The deal maxes out. So if he hits all of the kind of stipulations in his contract, it maxes out at 5 years, $250 million, or a simpler way to look at it, about $50 million per year for Big Chet. He becomes the highest paid Gonzaga player in NBA history, breaking the record set by Domantas Sabonis in 2023 when he signed a 5-year extension with the Sacramento Kings that paid out at $217 million. So Chet kind of blew that out of the water with this $250 million max extension. And you know, when you're a 23-year-old center who just helped lead your team to an NBA championship, I suppose it makes sense that you're going to get yourself some big bucks, and that's what happens here. The team really wants to keep this core together, the core being Chet Holmgren, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Jalen Williams, the Santa Clara product, who was absolutely incredible for OKC in this championship run. The next step for OKC is locking up Jalen Williams, and we'll see if they're able to find a way to make the money work by bringing in Williams and Chet on these monster extensions. Which I'm sure Jalen Williams will command a truckload of money, justifiably so, for him. And for Chet, I mean, I think a lot of the question here that a lot of people will have and are having and are talking about is the durability. And obviously it's been a storyline for Chet since he was in college. Really, it was a storyline when he was in high school, even concerned about his size, his frame, can he hold up? And unfortunately, Chet missed his entire rookie season with that Lisfranc injury in his foot. And then this past season, he missed 3 months or so. He only played 32 out of 82 regular season games. So certainly there is some reason for that concern to be there. I would like to point out, and many people skip this when having this Chet Holmgren discourse, is that the middle season there, he played all 82 games and in fact was 10th in the NBA in total minutes played in the regular season. I think if you were to poll a whole heck of a lot of people and ask them if Chet Holmgren has ever finished anywhere close to 10th in the NBA in minutes played, they would think you're crazy, but he did in fact do that in his second NBA season, his first actual NBA season, as he missed that entire rookie year. Regardless, Chet was great in the 32 regular season games he did play last year for Oklahoma City, 15 points, 8 boards, 2.2 blocks per game. He was even better when the playoffs rolled around. He averaged 18 per game in the Western Conference Finals against Minnesota, where he's from, but also against Rudy Gobert, a 4-time NBA Defensive Player of the Year. And Chet went out and knocked down nearly 20 a game. He also had a pair of double-doubles in the finals against the Pacers, and of course his old teammate Andrew Nembhard, as Oklahoma City ultimately won that thing in 7 games. In that 7th game, by the way, Chet had 5 blocks, which is the record for the most blocks in an NBA Finals Game 7 in the history of the sport. Very cool to see Chet continuing to set records so early in his NBA career. Very excited for Chet and this big old payday that he got from Oklahoma City. And again, I think entirely deserved based on the body of work that we've seen so far and the upside for him going forward as a 23-year-old in this league. Next up, we got to talk about Kelly Olynyk, kind of on the other end of the spectrum. You got a young guy who just got locked up to stay with the same team for a while. Meanwhile, you got an older guy in Kelly who's had a hard time finding a home that he sticks with in this last really 5 years or so for Big Kelly Olynyk. He was traded exactly 2 weeks ago. He was traded from the New Orleans Pelicans to the Washington Wizards in a deal where he was flipped alongside CJ McCollum. New Orleans got Jordan Poole. They got Sadiq Bey. They got a second-round pick that they turned into Micah Peavy. And Washington didn't seem like a supernatural fit for Kelly. It was kind of like, all right, he's going to be sort of a mentor for Alex Sarr, their young big man, and kind of be able to play that role and maybe get flipped at the trade deadline for more assets, more second-round picks, some salary relief, something like that. But instead, Washington just after 2 weeks said, yeah, we're actually going to go ahead and make that flip now. Send him to San Antonio, the Spurs, in exchange for Malachi Branham, Blake Wesley, and a second-round pick next year. So Washington continuing to get younger, continuing to trade their veteran assets for future picks for younger players. Very interested to see if Corey Kispert ends up being the next player traded from this Washington team. I know that my Portland Trailblazers are connected to him, and man, I cannot tell you how giddy I would be on the show if I was able to buy a Blazers Kispert jersey. That's beside the point. What matters is that Kelly Olynyk just can't find a home that he sticks with. This is the third time he's been traded in the year 2025. Sixth time in his entire career that he's been traded. Third time just this year. He was, again, from New Orleans. He was with the Pelicans. In February, he got traded. He was with Toronto to start the year, I should say. He was with Toronto all of last season and then the start of this season. And then at the trade deadline, he got flipped from Toronto to New Orleans in a deal that brought Brandon Ingram up north to Canada. And then he spent 20 games with the Pelicans, was solid with New Orleans, put up the same numbers he's put up throughout his career, about 11 points, 6 boards, 3.5 assists with the Pelicans. Then after the season, the Pelicans, like we mentioned, flip him to Washington. Washington turns around and sends him to San Antonio. So I feel for his family. I feel for, trying to figure out where are we going to be, where are we going to live? Should we just wait here until the season starts so we know where we're going to be? Even then, is he going to get traded in February for a third year in a row? Who knows the situation there. San Antonio, assuming he does play for the Spurs, will be his 8th team of his career. He spent his first 5 years in Boston, spent a couple years in Miami, and then was in Houston for a little bit, Detroit for a little bit, Utah for a little bit, and then Toronto, New Orleans, and now San Antonio. And look, we can kind of joke and talk about how strange this must be to keep getting flipped and moved, but ultimately, San Antonio is a much better landing spot. And again, Kelly was part of the trade between New Orleans and Washington. He was not the focal point of the trade. San Antonio gave up 2 players and a pick, and all they got in return was Kelly Olynyk. You do not make that move if you're not invested in the player that you're acquiring. So you got to feel much better if you're Kelly, like, okay, San Antonio actively pursued me. They wanted me. They traded pieces of value to get me specifically without, they're not just getting my contract. I'm not just a salary match in a trade for a player with a bigger contract. Like, they're seeking me out. And it's pretty clear what the role is going to be. San Antonio wants Kelly Olynyk to back up Victor Wembanyama. They want him to be the backup center. I think there's a bit of a mentorship role there as well. Both guys who are not from the U.S., obviously Wembanyama's skill set is not comparable in any capacity, but if you're looking for a big man who does some of the same things, Kelly's certainly not anywhere close to the defender that Wemby is, but offensively, he likes to space the floor. He can shoot the three. He can put the ball on the deck a little bit. Like, there's kind of some similarities there. Kelly's got a few things he could show Wemby and just kind of, help him kind of get used to the game and be that guy, and also just be a veteran presence that they can rely on so that Wemby doesn't have to play 35 minutes a game, or if he does need some load management or just gets an injury and needs to miss some time, Kelly can fill in and give you some of the same stuff, at least offensively. Again, I'm not trying to compare the two players, just saying that it makes sense logically why Kelly would be a fit as the backup center for somebody like Wembanyama. I'm excited for Kelly. I hope this works. I think for San Antonio, this is a team that's got some really young, talented guards, De'Aaron Fox, Stephon Castle, Dylan Harper, who they just drafted, Carter Bryant, who they just drafted as well. They also got Harrison Barnes and Devin Vassell. Like, this is a team that I think is going to compete in the Western Conference wide away, assuming Wemby stays healthy. And I would like to see Kelly get a chance to be a part of that and be with the team throughout the year and compete for them in the playoffs. We haven't seen him get to do that very often because he's been kind of bumbling around some not as good teams in the last few years. So this might be a cool kind of swan song for Kelly to get a chance to compete for a championship in San Antonio with the Spurs as he's now in his age 34 season. It's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Thank you so much To those of you who have made this show your first listen or your first watch of the day, of course, always want to give a special shout out to those everyday listeners and those of you who have hit the subscribe button on YouTube. If you're not among them, go do it. It's very quick. Just hit that little bell button. You're subscribed. You get notified whenever there's a new show. We're trying to get to 3,500 subscribers. We are very close. So any help you can provide there would be greatly appreciated. We'll be back with some more shows later this week. We'll, of course, keep you up to date on the Summer League as that continues to go on. We'll keep you up to date on recruiting as Gonzaga is active in the 26 and 27 recruiting classes. All that and more coming your way this month. Thanks again, folks. Have a fantastic rest of your day. And, of course, as always, go Zags.